Bye, Elmo. Bye.
Have to just change the sharing setting. So if it's not working immediately, I will make sure that's working. And there are 3 prompts there. Feel free to answer as many or as few as you'd like, but it's a great way for the students to gather all of the voices that are in the room and all the wisdom that's in the room and be able to look at that afterward. And even though they will have graduated, we know each of these students will continue to grow and evolve with their practice, and your feedback can help them do that. So please feel free to share those reflections either during the presentations or during the breaks. We'll have 15-minute breaks between each of the panels. Debbie, if you could monitor the chat, so if there's anything that I need to answer, that would be great. Students will present for maximum of 10 minutes each. And then we'll have hopefully about 15 minutes for question and answer. So please save up your questions. We particularly would love to hear questions that draw common threads across. So we've tried to group students in ways where there's connectivity. They've been thinking about the connectivity. And if you can help us kind of bring that together and ask those questions, we think that would be a great conversation. Any questions that I should answer before we get started? You can put up a physical hand or a virtual hand. Okay, great. David, I'm going to hand the screen to you.
All right, thank you. So much pressure for going first.
You get to set the standard.
I know, that's what I'm worried about.
You'll do great.
So first, I just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. Yes, okay. So I came up with the phenomenal title of Wait, Wait, Then Tell Me, which, as you can clearly see, is 100% original and not at all borrowed from any public radio shows. And the question that I sought to answer was, how do short, intentional pauses and breaks as pedagogical tools contribute to middle school students' ability to engage with information in Tanakh lessons in Jewish day schools? And that sounds very chunky. I promise it makes a lot more sense than all of these words, but we're going to get into that in just a minute. For right now, 3 Boston area Jewish day schools were observed. That is the main focus of the primary research. And that was done because the only true way, in my opinion, to discern whether or not pauses and breaks could actually work was by going into the field and seeing for myself. I obviously was able to read literature and read accounts, but there is nothing like firsthand experience. But first we need to go over some terms. And the terms that I'm going to use in this particular presentation are as follows. I'm using the term pause, meaning anything lasting from 1 to 20 seconds. I'm using the term extended pause as anything lasting from 20 to 59 seconds, and I'm calling a break anything lasting 1 to 3 minutes. Now, these are very arbitrary terms that I came up with, and the times are such that I decided. This is not according to any sort of dictionary or any set standard. These are the ways that I chose to use these words because there really is a difference between a pause, an extended pause, and a break. And the difference that I see, and one of the things that I talk about in my thesis, is I relate it to, as a sports fan, I relate it to basketball and timeouts, specifically in college basketball. And in college basketball, you have 3 different kinds of breaks in the action. You've got the 30-second timeout, which in this case would correspond most to the pause. You've got the minute timeout, the full timeout, which would be more like the extended pause. And then you have the break, which would be like the media timeout that is not just for the players. And I really see this as something that is different because they fulfill different functions. The pause can be for the students and the teacher. The extended pause can be for not just one student in particular, but for all the students, both to think for themselves in response to the teacher and in response to their peers. And a break is really something that, especially as I'm sure people can understand via Zoom, we kind of get distracted, and sometimes we need to take a quick break and just get the shakes out. And I see those as different things in a classroom setting because they all fulfill a different function. But you don't have to take my word for it, and you don't have to take LeVar Burton's word for it either. The website Teacher Vision suggests that by pausing during a lesson, student responses will increase by anywhere from 400 to 800%. And teachers agree. One of the schools that I went to, and one of the teachers I spoke to, we'll call them Teacher A, said students need movement breaks, and it's usually better after a quick break. And the reason that that struck me is because, one, I had never seen a movement break before. I had no idea what it was, but seeing it in practice and seeing what it did, not only for the students, but for the teacher, really was amazing to see, because you all of a sudden go from talking and doing a lesson to, okay, 60-second break, everyone just stand up, stretch, shake it out. And this is in a classroom. This is not via an online classroom or via Zoom. This is in the physical building, and a teacher is saying, okay, I see that you're getting restless. I see that we need to take a minute. So I'm going to give you that minute because I know that when that minute is up, you are going to come back. We're all going to come back, and things are going to be better. You are going to be more focused. You are going to be able to pay better attention, and you are going to really thank me for it. So now let's get into the data. Teacher A, when I was present, asked a small group of their students whether or not they liked the inclusion of a break in the lesson flow. This was not something that I initiated, and it was something that for a while when I was writing, I did not even think to include because I was not the one who initiated it, which I think furthers the point that these students answered in the affirmative, that they find these breaks helpful and that they like it. Additionally, one thing I observed is that when students are the ones running the conversations, they typically, by nature, pause when having discussions. This means that whether they are consciously doing it or not, it's still happening. And this is different, the pauses from the breaks, because, like I said, it's about the amount of time, and it's about specifically the kavanah, the intent that is going behind, or that is behind these pauses. If you are pausing for a couple of seconds for students to be able to think and gather their thoughts, then that is one kind of intention. If you are pausing or having a quick break for students to get their jitters out, that is a different kind of intention, but all of it is designed to benefit the students, which is, at the end of the day, the main point that I seek to learn from as an educator and really seek to improve on for students. Because at the end of the day, we as teachers are there for our students, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we put the students in the best position to learn. And the students agree as well. At another school that I observed, I asked students to indicate if they liked when a teacher would pause before calling on them, and the overwhelming majority raised their hands. Students were then asked if they like being given a brief break or even a pause during class, and they again showed strong support. So this is indicating to me that whether teachers are doing it or not, the students can tell that there is a difference, and the students are in fact benefiting from these quick instances. Whether it's a break and students are able to stand up, or whether it's just a pause and students are able to think for an extra second and are able to really gather their thoughts, these brief moments in time make a world of difference. But there's one thing that I want to make sure is very clear, and that is that there is a time and a place. There are times where a pause would not be beneficial. If there's a productive conversation or a meaningful discussion, then breaking that up with a pause or a break does not benefit the students. What I was saying before about this kavanah, this intention, is the big key and really the focal point. Because if you're having a discussion about something that is very engaging or something that's very serious and important, the worst thing that you can do is break that up. You don't want to lose the momentum. Again, it goes back to my basketball analogy. If you are the coach of a team and your team is on a roll and scoring bucket after bucket after bucket, the worst thing that you can do as a coach is call a timeout and disrupt that momentum. The other team might want to disrupt that momentum, but in a classroom where everyone is on the same team, you don't have that. The worst thing that can happen is a loss of momentum because all of a sudden you're going to go on a break or you're going to wait a couple seconds and you're going to ask students to come back and pick up right where they left off. And we all know that that is just not a reality. This is about helping students to be able to synthesize information and then interpret it. It's not just about a break for the sake of a break. It's about giving students the time that they need to be able to think. If I'm teaching a lesson like I've done before, and I am saying something to the students, then I am giving them a break because that is what they need. I'm not giving them a break because it's going to just make everything hunky-dory. I'm giving them a break because they are the ones who are going to benefit it. In some cases, the teacher can also benefit from it. This is obviously a phenomenal, not side effect, but additional bonus. And it's something that I, as an educator, really seek to implement even more into my classrooms in the future. So while certainly not all students benefit from pauses, the vast majority will and have. And for that reason, I'm able to conclude that pauses and breaks used as pedagogical tools with the proper intent can and do contribute to students' engagement with specifically Tanakh as a deeper way to think and uncover more levels of understanding in a condensed amount of time. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Just want to reflect on just the growth that we've seen in you over the last few years. And what struck me about this panel was in many ways how each person's story, their personal story, who they are as a learner and a teacher, came through in their research. And it's beautiful to see how the self-reflection has brought you to this greater question of what works in classrooms and what tools teachers might take. And that was a great narrow thing that you were able to go very, very deep, and we really appreciate you sharing. And I hope, apologies for the permissions issue, but I think everyone should have been able to get into David's document, and I'm sure he'll learn all that much more. I see many of your comments. Please continue to add them. So now we move on to Kelly Kossar. Kelly this is very connected presentation, because as I listen to David, I think about who are the students who need the pause, to gather their thoughts and join the conversation. And I think Kelly's conversation that she's going to lead us in really gives you a sense of who are the teachers and the learners who most benefit from those pauses, and what can we learn about how our classrooms and our schools can be inclusive of them. So Kelly, I'm handing the controls to you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm going to assume that everyone can hear me, or else someone will tell me they can't. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And okay, so as you can see, I have a nice Prezi ready for us. I'm going to start this morning by sharing a song that I feel really exemplifies all the research that I did this year. This song is called Turning of the World by Ruth Pelham. And this song talks about why we need every voice in the world to keep the world going. And I think that really speaks to my research. And I also feel like this is a really great introvert activity that I love. So it's a way for me to start in a confident way. Let us sing this song for the turning of the world, that we may turn as one. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our turning. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along. With every voice, with every song, we will move this world along, and our lives will feel the echo of our turning. And our lives will feel the echo of our turning. So why I chose introversion
Kelly,
as...
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second because we are not seeing your screen. So will you reshare that?
Let's see.
It's posted on the chat.
I think that's something different.
That's the Google Doc to share the reflection. So let's just give Kelly a moment to pull that up. Take your time. There you go.
Okay, Deb, can you see it now?
I'm seeing your Zoom screen. So I think you just need to show us a different.
Let me try it again.
Yep. In person, we always have 5 minutes between as we switch the docs. So everybody take a deep breath while we do this.
It's a pause.
It's a pause. Thank you, David. Perfect. This is a great moment to, there we go. I was going to say Kelly's Google Doc is shared in the link in the chat also. So please share your reflections there with her.
Okay. So there's a book that's really become important to me called Gift of Soul, Gift of Wisdom, a spiritual resource for mentoring and leadership by Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson. And in this book, this was a gift to me from my rabbi in college, Shalom Cantor. He gave me this book as a gift as I was graduating because he knew I was going on to becoming a mentor for other people. I was going to stop being the mentee for him. So he shared this quote with me that's really stuck with me that really frames my whole presentation. Every leader who leads the community gently merits to lead them in the world to come. And this is from Sanhedrin 92a in the Talmud. So there are lots of different places that really formed how I came to love introversion. The first place was the URJ Kutz camp, which you can see there's a picture right here, and Hillel at Binghamton. These two places were places that made me feel comfortable as an introvert and helped me to understand that this was okay to be an introvert and I should really embrace who I was. I spent a lot of time living in Boston working in a synagogue. So I shifted my focus of research from camp to synagogue. And I felt it was really important to explore a very specific question about introversion. So I came up with the question of how can introverted Jewish educators in a Boston Reform synagogue religious school succeed in a culture of extroversion?
Kelly, while you switch your slide, can you just turn your camera up a little bit so we can see more of your face? Great, thank you, perfect.
So the science of introversion, I'm going to give a quick summary of the science that I found. I think it's important to frame the rest of the conversation. So I used Susan Cain's Quiet, which became like my Bible. It was really important for me to understand where all the research came from. And she was the one who really has set the bar and has written all the research on it with her book Quiet. So there's one chapter in particular about how introverts and extroverts think and process dopamine differently. This all has to do with reward sensitivity in the brain, where a person is highly motivated to seek rewards for better or for worse. Extroverted people are more likely to be reward sensitive, while introverted people are more likely to pay attention to those warning signals that you might get with that. The positive emotion is what seems to underlie all this reward seeking, and extroverts seem to get an extra buzz from the pursuit and attainment of their goals. Introverts just don't buzz as easily. So the basis of buzz happens in this reward system of the brain, including the orbifrontal cortex, the nucleus accumbens, and the amygdala. So dopamine is that reward chemical that comes out, and that's what I focus a lot of my study on. So there was little research on introversion and Jewish education, which is where I came in. When I started my research, I found one article by one person that talked about Jewish education a little bit and what they had to do about introversion. And they really encouraged me to do my own research. That got me really excited about this topic. So my methods for my research. So I did a survey and I did interviews. For my survey, I interviewed approximately 5 people that were teachers in one religious school. And I also did a whole teacher-wide interview survey process to get an idea of how people were thinking about introversion and extroversion within the school. What was really surprising was the diversity of answers that I got back. I didn't expect people to say they weren't sure, or they felt like they weren't able to honestly share what they were thinking about because they just were confused about the whole topic. But I found that there were varied personality traits that really stood out, and that was more important than introversion and extroversion. So some things that I found. With self as professional, I asked this question because I was interested in hearing about how they felt themselves as teachers and as professionals in the field. There are 2 different camps that they fell into. They felt like they were responsible or they were creative. When we get to self as educator, we felt like they were structured and energetic, which sometimes are not exactly opposites, but in this case, I felt like they were pretty close to opposites. For self as learner, there was learning type versus energy source. I thought that was really interesting because people got their energy in different ways, and that's really a telltale sign of whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. And then self as human. People were outspoken, or they're caring, or they were systematic. So there is suggestions for some supported introverted teachers, which came up a lot in my research. So just to quickly go through them, to have student conferences instead of doing group activities, to get to know students more one-on-one is more likely to be comfortable for an introverted teacher. To come up with some introverted hobbies like I did with the guitar that could really give you some extra energy. to limit the noise in the room. So sometimes if you're a student, you might want to be wearing headphones if you're doing loud group activities, and that's able to be part of the activity at the same time. Permission to be alone, volunteering for introverted activities, social media, and awareness. So awareness is a big thing for me. And just to make sure that people know that there are introverted people and extroverted people and how that can play out in the classroom. So to wrap things up, when I was a counselor at camp, I found that it was really important to get feedback to be able to grow as a counselor. And the feedback I kept getting was to be more outgoing, to be more outspoken, to be really excited in front of the group, and it just wasn't me. So when my supervisor suggested that I switch jobs and become a counselor for the special needs group called Mitzvah Corps, I found that I was really suited for the position. I didn't have to be the person up in front of the room, and I could really find my energy within the group. And so I found that this was a great way to be able to give back to my community and to really stay true to who I was as an introvert. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. So great to see your whole self shining through here. We now are going to move on to Marc Stober. And Marc, while you get ready to share your screen, I'll give you a moment and I'll just finish talking about Kelly a bit. This panel is particularly students that I have known for a long time, from lengthy recruitment processes, and have seen so much growth and evolution in who they are. And again, this project so reflected your whole self, Kelly. So we're so proud and grateful that you shared that. I hope people have shared some thoughts I saw coming in Kelly's Google Doc. Please continue to share there. And after Marc's presentation, we'll ask for some Q&A. And if you have a particular question, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'll try to kind of bring the questions together, and we'll ask some that cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. Marc, are we ready to roll?
Yeah, let me just see. Is that working for screen sharing?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great.
Well done.
So thank you. So first of all, thank you, David, for going first. Thank you, Kelly, for the song, and thank you, all of you, for showing up in your Hollywood Squares windows. It's great to see you all. I don't know if this makes me an introvert or an extrovert, but it energizes me to see everyone there. On one side of the screen, we have the Torah scroll. That's the way people read what people read from in synagogue. On the other side, we have a marked up and formatted version of the same text by Cantor Linda Sue Sohn, which came out of the work that she actually did for her Master's of Jewish Education thesis. The left side is marked up so that it tells you exactly how to read it, all the cancellation marks, all of the vowels. And on the right side, what is there is, that is really hard to read. That is almost impossible to read. I have read this portion in synagogue and I still couldn't do it again without preparation. And we expect bar mitzvah kids to do it. Why do we do this? That sounds kind of crazy. Is there anything about this process that makes sense other than, as Tevye would say in Fiddler on the Roof, tradition? Especially now when so many traditions are falling by the wayside in these times. Now, let me be clear, we're in the business of tradition. That's what we're doing in religion. But we're not, I don't believe we're doing tradition just for tradition's sake. It's not like students should suffer through bar mitzvah prep because their parents and their grandparents did. That's not the type of Jewish education that I believe in. But given that Torah reading is something that is meaningful for a lot of people, then are we teaching it the best way that we can? So this led me to my research question, which is, how are strategies used to train Torah readers in American synagogues consistent with what we know about the learning scientifically from the perspective of cognitive psychology? During my master's in Jewish education, I learned something about the recent cognitive psychology research on how brains learned primarily from my course with Dr. Efrat First in human development. And the short answer to these questions are, in some ways, yes, they are consistent, but not on purpose. And not only can we do better, but we can make it more meaningful and give our students more useful skills in the process. I conducted a survey of educators working in the field, cantors and bar mitzvah tutors and other educators. I got 33 responses. Most of the people who responded were musicians of some sort or another. Most of them did not have an education degree, either a general or a Jewish education degree. Why is this interesting? Even teachers working in the field in general education aren't always up on the latest academic research. And so even more so, people without academic training in education who are working in the Jewish education field may not be up to date on the latest research on how brains learn this and we have a fairly difficult task for brains to learn here. But this is also one of the hardest obstacles. So let me name a problem that we have in the field. I do it my way because it's better. Why don't you do it my way? This was a quote I heard from a cantor who has published a number of resources on on training bar mitzvah students or in Torah trope. And you know, everyone has their system that works, or many people have their system that works. It may be that works for them, and that's what we need. As someone who's, you know, new to the field, at least new on the professional education side of the field, you know, just knowing that some system worked for someone with no evidence is not necessarily something I can use in order to decide how I'm going to teach. And also, I don't necessarily think it's best for the community just to say, you know, kind of, it's working for me, so that's the best we can do. I think we want to make sure that we're doing something that is meaningful, providing meaningful experiences to Jews. So to look at what is going on, so this book, Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning by Peter Brown, Henry Roediger, and Marc McDaniel. Roediger and McDaniel are Washington University psychology professors. And I was introduced to this book in Dr. First's class. And they list a number of strategies. I'm not going to read them all out now. I would encourage you, if you are a teacher, you need to read this book. If you are not a teacher and you just care about learning and how you learn, read this book. It's really a wonderful book. But we're going to see how a couple of these methods apply to some methods that are used for Torah reading. Okay, color coding. This is the one we're all going to get into an argument about. When I entered cantorial school, I had this idea of color coding where I expected that I would learn the secret method of color coding that made it easy to learn Torah reading. Instead, in my first cantillation class, I saw one of my fellow students who had a very established system of color coding really struggle to do the work. In my survey, 40% of us 40% of teachers rated having their students color code as important. On the other hand, I got a really insightful comment from actually another Master's of Jewish Education graduate who works with students with special learning needs, saying that color coding creates too large of a cognitive workload. I tend to agree with this. Learning a set of colors that aren't in the scroll or standard just gives students an extra thing to learn, and having extra things to learn in your brain while you're learning, that's the issue of the cognitive load. That's not really helpful. The good news, though, is that while 40% said that having students color code was important, 53% of respondents said that having a pre-color coded version of the Torah was not important. So teachers intuitively get it. Having students being able to recognize the trope phrases and actually do something with it, that is where the learning happens. Color coding, people like playing with highlighters. So color coding is a fun and convenient way to do this. But the actual educational process that's going on is something that is called elaboration, the process of giving new material meaning by expressing it in your own words and connecting it with what you already know. So the thinking about what you know, the mental processing of what you know, whether you're using highlighters or not, that is really where the learning happens, and that is the important message that's going on. Another thing I want to talk about is what I am coming to call scroll simulation. 44% of respondents to the survey said that looking at photos of the actual Torah scroll was important, but there's still room to do more. 68% of teachers, so most of them said that within a year of learning, almost everyone did bar mitzvah tutoring for about a year. They only expected students to be able to read without vowels in the last 2 months. I didn't get into a lot of details in this because it wasn't my initial research focus, but I think there's room to do more of that because a number of the cognitive strategies that we learn about from science come into play when we're looking at the what we call the unpointed text without the vowels and the marks. This includes retrieval practice, which is the most important thing, which is just trying to remember what you know after you've learned it once, or have some knowledge of it. Testing, simulation, the generation effect. That's where you're using your brain to try to fill in what is missing. Indesirable difficulty. Again, you can look up all these things in the book or talk to me afterwards. But what this means is that you are looking in the scroll, even when you don't feel ready to look in the scroll, even when you are getting it wrong, it helps you learn. As long as you're getting it wrong and getting corrective feedback, it helps you learn. And maybe it's not fun because you're getting it wrong and getting corrected, but it's still that actually, the science says that helps you learn. That's what we mean when we have an evidence-based method. We're not just going by our intuition or how something feels, we're going by scientific evidence in terms of what actually helps people learning. So I would suggest, and maybe this is even an idea for someone to research next year, try spending more time with the stam text, even when you don't feel ready for it. That's the calligraphy text or something that looks like it, and that could help with Torah, with helping people learn Torah reading more efficiently. So in conclusion, I think there's some good news here. I'm encouraged. First of all, the science says that the best way to learn are ways that create meaning. We are all about creating meaning. We're all about creating a meaningful Jewish experience. And so while we might be tempted to separate this technical performance skill of reading Torah that you don't understand from something, from the meaningful parts of learning about being Jewish, it's actually meaning and learning skills go together. So that's great news from the science. We're also teaching foundational skills. Okay, so our students won't be able to read biblical Hebrew fluently, but we are teaching them a foundational skill in engaging with Torah study. Moreover, we're teaching them study skills, learning skills. We're teaching them how to learn. There's a stereotype that Jews value education, and we usually think that means doctors and lawyers as opposed to rabbis. But I mean, here it is. We are teaching our students how to learn. And I think that we can bring that science of learning to the front of how we teach. I think we can emphasize it. And I think that will help us fulfill our mission as religious educators. So thank you for listening. And we'll take questions at the end. And whatever you can't ask, or if you want to see more of my research, please feel free to email me.
Great. Thank you so much, Marc. And just as a note, we always have theses are always stored in the library, in the Hebrew College library, and we also have them digitally available as PDFs, and students will be happy. I see already some people asking to use them for a future class or for their own edification. It's wonderful that we are already thinking about how we can build on this research. And again, thanks to each of these panelists for really sharing themselves through their research and helping us think about what kind of learner you are and how that can influence what kind of teacher you are. I'd like to take just one or two questions because we are running out of time. So if anyone has one that might bring this all together. Rebecca Redner, I'd love to point to you. I know you have so much expertise in this from your longtime work with gateways and thinking about teaching and learning from an inclusive perspective. Would you share your question for the panel?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Yesher Koach, first of all, you all did great. I was wondering how you feel that your findings could be applied to students with special learning needs. And I'm not sure if they should just go in the order in which they presented.
Anybody who wants to unmute, let's go ahead. David, go ahead.
I can definitely take that because I think that especially with special needs and just overall inclusion, the use of a pause or use of a break is very beneficial to those students, because I think that whether we realize it or not, and I know that at least comparatively, Rebecca, I do not have the same kind of background with working with kids with special needs, at least compared to you, but I do know that for the most part, we inherently give a little bit of extra time to kids who have special needs. And whether we realize it or not, I think that we have really been giving breaks and pauses to students with special needs for much longer. And I think that if anything, that is the model potentially for moving forward into regular classrooms. I think about my personal experience getting extended time on tests and that benefit that I was able to have, and really being able to see that sometimes having this extra time is just necessary. And I think that because of the need to sometimes say to a student who might have cognitive delays or disabilities or inabilities, saying this is not abnormal, this is the new normal, would be a great way to really integrate into overall classrooms, not just classrooms of students who have cognitive delays or developmental disabilities in any way.
Kelly or Mark, do you want to comment quickly on that? And then it looks like we have one more question.
Sure, I'll go. I really think that introversion and extroversion, and thinking about that, is really just good practice in general for reaching students. So I think it really can apply to anyone across the board. I don't think it matters if you have a disability or not. I think that for special needs students, especially, thinking about different personality types is really important.
Yeah. And I just want to add, like, it's one of the things that I didn't focus on students with disabilities, but I did bring up in the thesis the idea of universal design for education. And as we understand how brains work, we can, rather than relying on specific strategies that we just may have found worked in the past, we can try to create, a framework that is evidence-based as to how we can teach anyone, because we know how brains work, and then from there we can adapt it. So we're not saying, well, we need color coding, but we don't know how to teach a student who's colorblind. Instead, we can say, we know it's about getting a student to make connections with the material in a certain way.
Thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. It's so nice to have, we have several of our alumni here. I know that there are some lingering questions. Here's what I want to do. I want to make sure to ensure that we have a break. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to ask anyone with questions and the panelists, if you don't mind sticking around while others take a break, and then we can ask those questions during the break. And feel free to continue those conversations online, and that way we'll start our next panel on time. So I just want to thank these three presenters again for bringing their whole selves to their teaching, to their research, to their presentations today. It has been such a pleasure to watch each of you grow just exponentially during your time in this program, and we can't wait to continue supporting you once you're continue out in the field. So Mazal Tov, you can take a deep breath. You get a long pause now, and let's all take those 10 minutes, and we'll meet back here at 10. For those going to walk away for the computer, just put your mute and stop your video. And again, for those who still had a question for Kelly, David, or Mark, please feel free to stick around and we can answer those during the break. Thanks everybody, and thank you for your contributions to the Google Docs. Those are going to be good for the presenters to mull over. Dan, did you want to ask your question during this break?
Yeah, I had a question for Marc Stober. Hi, Marc.
Hi.
So, Marc, as you probably know, I've been teaching B'nai Mitzvah for 40 years, but I don't, like 99% of people that teach B'nai Mitzvah, I don't have any formal training as an educator. So I learned a lot of it on the fly, you know, seeing what works and what doesn't work. I have been using the color codes pretty much since I started. But you know, and then of course I've had a few times where I've had students that just literally don't see colors at all, and I've just designed different shapes to go along with the different you know, trope phrases. But I just wanted to have you thinking, and maybe I should get a chance to read your thesis. What do you think is a better model for being able to teach the kids? I mean, I do very similar to what you're saying. You know, I teach them for a bit till we have enough material that they can actually put sentences together and then work on that, you know, from the unpointed text. So it's pretty much not any different from, like, again, 99% of B'nai Mitzvah teachers these days. So what model do you think is going to be more effective, having a better understanding of how people learn?
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think that you should not use color coding, especially if you're asking the students to do the color coding. I think, you know, what my research suggested is that, first of all, you want to build the foundational building blocks, meaning you want to teach them the trope phrases. And, you know, color may be a way to do that, but the more important thing is that they're learning to recognize the trope phrases, and it's kind of however you do that. If colors are helpful for a student, great, but sort of keep the focus on, is the student able to pick out, here's a Sof Pasuk phrase, here's an Etnakta phrase, and not really worry so much about if they're coloring them accurately, as long as they're more worried about if they're picking them out. And then, I mean, the other part, and this is where, like, this is where I think someone, you know, in a future year could maybe even do a study of this specifically, is that bringing them into the unpointed text sooner, and probably with a lot of encouragement of, like, you know, you're going to get it wrong and I'm going to correct you, and that doesn't mean you're, like, not a good Torah reader. That's the way we learn, and, like, sort of teaching them, you know, sort of that mindset based approach that, like, you know, the way you learn is by, you know, making mistakes and picking it up again. Because, like, the very unintuitive thing I learned from the research is that sometimes if you just go with what makes you feel the most confident in learning, you're actually not learning as much. It's in that uncomfortable part of, like, trying something and getting it wrong, and then being corrected. I remember reading Torah once at Temple Emmanuel, and, like, I switched Etnakta and Mercha or something like that, and you corrected me, and then the next time, you know, when it was the real date, I was like, that was Davka, the one thing I remembered to get right, because, you know, I'd gotten it wrong and was corrected. So that sticks in my mind.
Okay, thank you, Marc. Appreciate it.
David, I wanted to thank you and Marc and Kelly for the presentations. I wanted to comment specifically on yours. It reminded me of our conversations about wait time in the Models of Teaching class. And I've been noticing that in Zoom conferences, how many teachers are so uncomfortable with seconds of silence, literally seconds, and just immediately feel like they have to fill that space. Even other students on a Zoom call, it happened yesterday with the iFellows at one of the sessions, where not 2 seconds had gone by before this person said, well, I can't stand this silence, so I'm going to fill it now, and just started talking without having fully formulated their thoughts. And so that really came into play in so many ways. And I actually did love your sports analogy. And I think the backstaging that you did is so important. In other words, the teacher should do backstaging with the students about why they're giving them these breaks, that it's intentional. And it's not a response to sometimes the students being disruptive or restless, in the sense that we all need to regroup right now. And so we're gonna do this intentional break or intentional pause. And I think in response to what Rebecca Redner was asking, we're just teaching the whole child, the whole student. Marc, of course, your system, your meaning and the skills that we're giving the students is so important. The same with Kelly's. It's about the whole person, each unique. So there can never be just one system that works. We know when we work with an individual that different students are going to respond positively to different kinds of input, different kinds of stimulation even, let alone different systems. So I really appreciated the work that each of you did on this. And I think sharing intentions behind what we do is so important. So thanks to all three of you.
Thank you. One of the things that actually came up in my discussion and interview with Teacher A, who I shared a little bit of, was that they said sometimes you need to let the silence sit even if it feels uncomfortable. And that was really the catalyst for me choosing this topic, because I thought about how in journalism, which in, I guess, a past life, I was very fond of and dabbled in. In journalism, the interviewer is never supposed to be the one who breaks and never supposed to be the one who ends the silence. And in education, it's usually the opposite, but also the function of the interviewer and the function of the teacher are different, in that the interviewer is trying to extract information even if it might not be comfortable, and the teacher needs to discern whether or not it is uncomfortable and students just don't want to answer, or whether there's a lack of understanding. And that was really, for me, the catalyst behind why I chose this particular topic.
Kelly, I wanted to tell you that your presentation reminded me of an article that I shared with my models of teaching students, but you came into Hebrew College after that course would have happened for you, so I didn't get to share it with you directly. But it's about reaching out to the introvert next to you in shul. You know, how to recognize that the fact that the person isn't necessarily speaking up in the larger group setting doesn't mean they're not there, present, or thinking about the things that you are talking about, or not fully enjoying the things that you are enjoying. They're just doing it in a different way. And so again, it's about this, you know, the breadth of humanity. We're each unique, and we want to enjoy the uniqueness in each other. And it came up even in our discussions yesterday, again, because Kelly is also an I fellow. It came out with our discussions about complexity in discussions about Israel, that sometimes when you're presented with a different opinion, a divergent idea from what you hold, you need to sit with it. And even if it's uncomfortable, learn to be able to sit with it. So,
great. Thank you, Susie.
Thanks to all of you.
Thank you to everyone. We're going to make the transition now. So please do add comments to the Google Doc, and we're going to transition over to Marion, who's going